Welcome to the whirlpool of the Unsolved. I'm your host, Frank. Thanks for tuning in. Here, I talk about unsolved cases, mysteries, unsolved crimes, and more from some of the most popular cases known to the ones that aren't really spoken much about. So I hope you enjoy the show. In today's episode, we will be talking about the unsolved case of Jeanette Depalma. So before we get into this episode, I do want to apologize for not releasing an episode earlier last week. I did go through some health issues recently, so it was hard for me to actually get back into recording episodes. But nonetheless, I'm back, and this show is just getting started, and I expect a lot of things from this show, and I expect you guys to enjoy this show. So I have this episode that you're going to listen to right now, and I have some other episodes lined up as well. Next week's episode is going to be a 2-part episode, more than likely, and instead of releasing it back-to-back days, just because sometimes in situations like what recently happened, it's hard for me to actually record beforehand. I'm gonna separate them by week, so it'll be part 1 week and then part 2 the following week. But enough with that. Let's go ahead and get into this case of Jeanette Depalma. Was it witchcraft? Many believe it to be, rightfully so, since what was found with her body was something out of the norm. Where she was found may have just confirmed that thought process. The truth of the matter is that this is still an unsolved case. There are many theories and moving parts. A young girl that was known to be a certain way, who lost her life under a dark cloud. An investigation that feels botched and almost purposely. But who knows the truth? Who knows anything, really? So this case that we're going to be talking about Jeanette Depalma, it's very a strange case, and I'm just going to speak about the victim. She disappeared. So like I said, once again, her name is Jeanette Depalma. She disappeared August 7th of 1972. At the time, she was only 16 years old. She was born in Jersey City, New Jersey. It seemed her family moved to Springfield, where she was being raised and where she sadly eventually lost her life. So she was originally from Jersey City, New Jersey, but was living in Springfield during the time when that horrific tragedy occurred. Doing some research, Jersey City to Springfield wasn't really far from each other, honestly. The town and city were only about 30-minute ride away from each other. So kind of gives you an idea of how far, the cities and the towns were from one another. And it's probably most likely that her mom wanted her to live in a more suburban area, because from what I was reading and researching, it was a smaller town. It was a smaller town compared to the city that she was living in at the time. So that's probably why they moved out when she was young. Now, like I said, she was 16 years old at this time when she lost her life. And I don't, if you've heard me before in some of the other episodes, you would know that when it comes to young people and kids and things like that dying and stuff like that, it hits me home a little bit more, just because, they're young, they have their whole life ahead of them. I'm not saying that older people don't have their life ahead of them or anything like that, but when you're thinking about a teenager, or when you're thinking about a young child, they have so much ahead of them. They haven't experienced anything, And this is a 16-year-old teenager that we're talking about that still had most likely 2 years of high school and probably college or whatever else ahead of her, and she was never able to experience any of that. So that, like I said, when it comes to younger children or teenagers or anything like that, it hits me a little bit different when it comes to these cases. Now, looking at the location of this incident, it was in her town of Springfield. It was Springfield Township, Union County, New Jersey. That's exactly how it's called. It's very, very long. Her body was discovered, though, exactly atop of a cliff inside of Springfield's. I'm trying to pronounce this right. Howdale Quarry. So it wasn't really. How do I say? It was actually found on top of a cliff. So where her body was located, it wasn't just inside the town, but it was inside of, on top of a cliff in a quarry. Now the thing is, when it comes to the location, it's a very strange situation and a very strange location, and we'll speak about it a little bit more when we get to that point. But just to give you an idea, this is a place that wasn't really that far from where she lived at. So whatever happened most likely happened in town, and but there's a few things that happened that make you wonder, like, what really happened. Clearly I'm repeating myself, but you have an idea of what I'm saying. So I'm just going to go ahead and tell you exactly what happened, give you the story of what happened, and then we'll go more into details of what I personally believed happened or just my theories and things like that. Now, getting into the case itself, it's a strange one with many moving parts. That's the honest truth. Like we see in a lot of unsolved cases, unsolved mysteries, there's a lot of moving parts. The day that Jeanette was said to have gone missing and officially pronounced dead, so the day that she was pronounced missing, she was also officially pronounced dead, was August 7th of 1972. The thing is, they're basing this off of the fact that this was the day she had gone to visit someone. So she had told her mother that she was going to take the train that day to go visit a friend. So I want to emphasize a friend. So my thing is, this young teenager tells her mom, hey, on the 7th of August, Mom, I'm going to go see a friend, okay? That evening, when Depalma didn't come back from her friend's house, her mother immediately filed a missing persons report with the Springfield Police Department. So her mother, just knowing that, hey, my daughter hasn't come back and she was supposed to go with a friend, she's not here, I have to call the police. She did a missing persons report immediately. Within the time that she went missing and her body was discovered, there wasn't much information on what the police were actually doing, because the thing is, you got to think about it. One thing I can sit here and say is that the same day that she went out, when she didn't return, a lot of times when you go to the police department and you actually do a missing persons report, they actually ask you to wait about 24 to 48 hours, depending on the situation. And she did this immediately. So, like, her daughter didn't come back that evening. She went ahead and did this. I would assume that they tried to locate Miss Depalma. That's just my personal opinion. But at the same time, they probably just didn't take it serious just because it was so quick. It wasn't even 24 hours. But 6 weeks later, after she went missing, she was located. So this is 6 weeks after the fact. So this is a month and a half after she went missing. So now, when I was reading, I didn't really see much about what the police department was doing in the sense of trying to find her. I didn't see anything whatsoever that indicated that they actually cared and they were actually doing their job. Honestly, like, I've looked around, I looked at different articles and things like that, and there was no indication that they actually did like a search party or anything like that. But 6 weeks after she went missing, they actually located her. Now, the way her body was discovered was unexpected and sad. A local dog, so hear this out. A local dog found and brought a decomposing forearm bone to its owner. So this dog went out into the quarry on the cliff and found this bone, this decomposing bone. And this decomposing bone was a forearm bone, and it brought it back to its owner. When the owner got a hold of this bone, they had contacted the officials immediately. Well, clearly, you would think that you would do that because I would do that too. Clearly, your dog brings you something, and this is a bone we're talking about. This is strange. Clearly, you're gonna contact the authorities. After police got a hold of this, they searched around where the dog had found this forearm. So immediately, hey, where was the dog? Let's go over there. Let's search the area. Let's see where he got this from, which led them to the cliff inside of Springfield Howdale Quarry. So this dog led them to the quarry. There, they found the body, the remains of Jeanette Depalma. They were able to confirm that this was her by her dental records. So they were able to confirm that this was Jeanette almost immediately just by her dental records. Now, the weird and crazy part about this case is how and around what they found her. So they found her on this cliff, and it's upsetting that it took so long for them to find her. I did see the map of this town, and to be honest, the map of this town is really not that big. And just to think that this police department didn't do a better job of trying to locate and find Jeanette is kind of upsetting, because you would think a 16-year-old girl, yeah, probably during that time, a lot of people running away and stuff like that, you're not taking it serious. But from what I was reading, this was a girl that was, very... She was very Christian-like. I'm going to say Christian-like. But she was almost like a Miss Goody Two-Shoe in a weird way. But we know how sometimes that can just be a facade or whatever the case may be. But the thing is, her mom seen her as a responsible person. So for her not to come back, clearly it set an alarm off to her mother. And just the fact that the police didn't do as much as I think that they could have done to help find Jeanette is kind of sad, because 6 weeks later, you find a decomposing body and the remains of this girl, which is upsetting. Now, apparently when they discovered her skeletal remains, it was surrounded by a series of strange and possibly occult objects. And that was the words that were written, possibly occult objects. Now, exactly what they were and exactly how they found her is really questionable. They don't really exactly say what it was that was found around her. They don't really say like how her body was laid down. There's only like theories, and some people say that she was found around a pentagram and all these things, but there's really not an exact way that they found her. Like I was looking and I couldn't find exactly how they found her. But there was some information. The most commonly agreed upon account from all of it states that her remains were found in a coffin-shaped perimeter, meaning that she wasn't in a coffin, but it was like as if they put objects around her in that formed into a shape of a coffin. So like branches and things like that, which was believed to be shaped with fallen branches, like I said, in logs. So that's really that's like the most commonly agreed upon account that I've found when it comes to that. Now, inside this makeshift coffin were wooden crosses. These are the accounts that I've read. So not only was it a makeshift coffin, but inside this makeshift coffin were wooden crosses. That's why it makes it almost an occult type of situation. And this makes it very, very strange and very weird, if you ask me. Outside of that, some Springfield residents claimed that De Palma's remains were actually found lying on top of a pentagram. See, this is what I was saying. There's the residents are saying that her body, her remains were actually found lying on top of a pentagram, where other accounts and the most commonly agreed upon account is she was inside of this makeshift coffin with crosses. Now, not only did the residents claim that De Palma's remains were actually found lying on top of a pentagram, but also surrounded by mutilated animal remains. So this is where it goes into like the occult and things of that sort, which really makes you wonder like what really happened here. Like there's different accounts, one agreed upon, but then there's what you have the residents talking about. And sometimes like it's hard to believe the police, especially if like in this case it was a person's dog that found a bone. The police um didn't even find the body. It was a dog that found this body. So it's just one of those things where what like you ask yourself, what should you believe? Now the police denied that what the local said was true about, you know, the pentagram and mutilated animal remains, but further controversy had aroused when locals and other people discovered where exactly the decomposing body was found. So now this is where it gets weird, because the cliff that she was found on was known to the locals of that area as the Devil's Teeth. This was something that the locals knew the cliff as for several decades prior to De Palma's death. So let's rewind a little bit. Her body is found in the quarry on a cliff in a makeshift coffin with apparently wooden crosses inside. Possibly, by the residents' claims, a pentagram under her with mutilated animal parts. The cliff itself was known to the locals as the Devil's Teeth way before De Palma's death. Now, if you ask me, that is extremely strange. You ask me, what do I think about this? I think that this is a very strange case and too many coincidences. If you ask me, do I think that if this was an occult type of murder or killing, honestly, when you add everything together, I personally believe it may have had something to do with some sort of occult followers or following. Personally, if you ask me, just because of how everything just lines up. But the frustrating part is the police department and how long it took to find De Palma in a small town, and looking into this case, not seeing that they did much. And we're going to talk about the investigation a little bit with the evidence, okay? So when it comes to the investigation of this case, I can honestly say that I feel like they didn't do much to bring justice to this case. That is the God honest truth when it comes to this case. Now, that is clearly my personal opinion. Everyone is entitled to theirs, but I have my reasons. The investigation started after the autopsy of Jeanette did not reveal a cause of death. So after they went ahead and did the autopsy, and the autopsy did not reveal a cause of death, they decided to go ahead and start investigating. Isn't that crazy? Which, if you ask me, is very strange. Her remains didn't show much of anything. Her clothing showed no evidence of bone fractures, bullet wounds, or even knife strikes. There was no drug paraphernalia found on or even around her body. Now, for whatever reason, the coroner suspected that strangulation was the cause of death, leading this case to be considered an unsolved homicide. So the coroner believed that she may have died due to strangulation. Now, when it comes to strangulation, a lot of times you have markings on your neck and stuff like that. When I looked deeper in for information, I didn't see any remarks of scarring or bruising around her neck. So it makes me wonder why the coroner believed that it may have been due to strangulation, because in reality, I personally believe there would have been some sort of evidence, and especially bruising, especially being they found her body 6 weeks after. The coroner had also discovered a high amount of lead in her remains, but no explanation was ever found for that. Now, when it comes to the lead, honestly, during this period of time, lead-based paint, things like that, it's possible that she lived in a house where there was a lot of lead and it was just in her body. That's possibly the reason, just thinking about it, and I've thought about that numerous times. So keep that in mind. That is a possible reason for her having a high amount of lead in her body. But no explanation was ever found for that. Now, early in the investigation, the Springfield police did get a tip about a homeless man that lived in the woods near the place that the body was eventually found. The man was known by the locals and they called him Red. So the locals knew him. His name was Red. That's what they called him. The locals claimed that Red had left the woods shortly after Depalma had gone missing. So apparently, Red lived in the woods. Shortly after Jeanette went missing, apparently this man was no longer seen. He had left. He had left the area. The police looked into it, finally feeling like they had a lead, because clearly they didn't do much. But after looking into this lead, they decided that Red had nothing to do with the case of Depalma. He was no longer a suspect. Now, here is what gets me. After this one tip, they continued to attempt to find leads, but with little evidence and a lack of help from the locals and the public in general, as well as the inconsistent stories from her family, friends, and peers, the case went cold, which I feel like there was more they could have done but didn't. There was plenty of rumors and things that went around. Jeanette, from what I read, was like I said, she was almost a very Miss Goody Two Shoes. But at the same time, that could be a facade. I don't know the girl myself. At 16 years old in high school, you would assume she probably had a crush. She probably had a boyfriend. She probably told her mom that she went to go see a friend, but really went to go see a boyfriend or something. There's a lot of things that could have happened when it came to this case. But when I read into it and when I look at the investigation and what the police did, they literally did little to nothing, which is upsetting, because you would think that they would go into really asking questions like, hey, did Jeanette, was she talking to a man? Was she talking to a boy? Was she interested in somebody? Did she have an intimate relationship with somebody? They didn't do anything. Like, honestly, from what I've read, they didn't do anything. And blaming it on the people and the town for not helping you. First and foremost, if you would have been doing your job from the very very beginning, I'm pretty sure you would have found the body not 6 weeks after the fact, because it was the same day that her mother went ahead and reported that her daughter went missing. Now, whether or not you wanted to search for her that day is a whole entire different story. But at the end of the day, if she reported her daughter missing and in 48 hours her daughter didn't return, as a police department, you should have done the initiative to actually start searching. If you know that there's this query where the locals know and have this idea, because let's be realistic. If you're if you're part of a police department, you know all the urban legends, you know all the stories, you know, especially in a small town, you know about what locals talk about, scary stories, haunted stories, whatever. You have an idea, especially a detective. Come on, man. You've probably heard stories around. Why did it take 6 weeks to find this body in a place that should have been checked? And clearly it wasn't checked because 6 weeks later, a dog found something there that led them to go there. That's my whole thing. I'm just saying. And as you can tell, I'm passionate about this because it really makes me wonder, what did they really do to try to bring this girl back home or even find her? Now, here's when it gets a little weird. See, there were allegations of what may have happened. Around 2 weeks after her remains were found, several newspapers began reporting that she may have been a victim of an occult sacrifice. And that's where I kind of told you that I believed that this may have been some sort of occult killing. They believe that the sacrifice would have been carried out either by Satanists or by a local coven of witches who operated inside nearby Watchung Reservation. Now, I did look at where Watchung reservations were to the location of where her body was found. It really isn't that far, to be honest with you. And it's possible if this local coven was into that type of stuff, it's possible that they just went out and, hey, Jeanette was in the wrong place at the wrong time. These reports were stirred up by the fact that her body was found with strange objects around her remains, as well as the theories of the Depalma family's pastor, James Tate. Now, these rumors did set panic in several Union County communities since they were still recovering from the shock of the John List murders, which happened only 10 months prior to this case. So 10 months prior to this case, this area had suffered more tragedy with John List. And since that is already a solved case, we won't be talking about that. But this is during a time where there's a lot of stuff going on. And honestly, it's sad. Now, there was a book written about this case. The book, if you want to look into it, is called Death on the Devil's Teeth: The Strange Murder That Shocked Suburban New Jersey. In this book, it goes into details on this case, which honestly I have yet to read, but I will be doing so myself. After reading it, who knows, I may end up coming back to this case. Now, in this book, though, the author, Mark Morin and Jesse P. Pollock, believed that there were instances where the police possibly had covered up in this case, as well that the police department had lost the case file to this case. They blamed the losing of this case file caused by Hurricane Floyd back in 1999, but others allege that a copy of this case is still on file. Like I said, personally, I believe the police department. Now, I'm definitely going to look into this book, possibly read it, and if I get any additional information or any information that honestly I believe is good to share, maybe we have a second part to this Jeanette Depalma case. But to be honest with you, just hearing this all together, you can kind of get an idea of what I'm saying about the fact that I believe the police department didn't do much to try to solve this case or help the Depalma family. 6 weeks after being considered missing and not even attempting to actually find her, because like I said, if you was initially trying to find her, don't you think that you would have went to the places where people had strange beliefs or urban legends or stories or anything like that, like a detective? Like, if you're a detective, you're going to ask, hey, where would you, where would this person go? What route would this person go? Like, where's Lover's Lane? Where's this? Where's that? There's so many questions that you can ask as a detective that in reality, if you were doing your job correctly, you possibly would have found the body before 6 weeks. That's my personal opinion. Now, like I said, to each its own. But this case is still unsolved, and to be very honest, nonetheless, a strange one. Now, I know that this is a little bit longer than the other ones, but this is only in part one. Next week, it will be part one for a 2-part episode. So I hope you guys tune in and really enjoy this episode and look forward to the next one. But honestly, when it comes to this case, that's all I have. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Whirlpool of the Unsolved. Check in next week for a new episode, and make sure that you like the podcast and follow the social media pages. Instagram at Whirlpool of the Unsolved Podcast, Twitter at WTO Unsolved Pod, and Facebook page Whirlpool of the Unsolved. Till next time.